"The original half-breeds are determined to save their rights or to perish at once," said Metis leader Louis Riel after the Canadian government ignored his petition that fought for the Metis' plea to be governed fairly. "Would you rather live a life of constant degradation or not live at all?" The Metis Uprising under Louis Riel in 1885 should be commemorated because at that time the Metis' land rights were being taken away, the Canadian government ended the provisional government of the Metis by force, and the Metis leader Louis Riel was hanged. These three events clearly mark a dark, dreadful day for Canada because of the appalling way the government handled the Metis situation. No equality, no justice, no rights. My first point is that the Metis' land rights are being taken away. In 1882, the Metis of Saskatchewan watched as federal surveyors staked out land that they had already claimed. Surveyors began mapping out grid patterns in advance of railway expansion and land development by white settlers, who were moving in as the monopoly of the Hudson's Bay Company was ending. This led to the Metis' old life as fur traders and carriers ending, bringing their dependency to farming. The fact that they owned narrow strips of land on or near the South Saskatchewan River was being ignored by the surveyors, and some white settlers were now entitled to parts of these lands of the Canadian government that was a relentless, ugly beast devouring all the land. My second point is that the Canadian government clearly had no intention of negotiating with the concerned people of the Saskatchewan and ended the provisional government of the Metis by force. The Metis were not the only people suffering in the area, as the local Cree First Nations peoples were starving, partly due to the dwindling buffalo population, and the settlers felt that the Canadian government was disinterested in the farmers' problems after 3 years of poor crops. The government was not responding to the Metis' representations that were made on their behalf to the Canadian government. In December 1884, a petition circulated on behalf of the Saskatchewan Settlers Union and Metis, demanding the early issue of deeds, tariff reductions, control of natural resources, and the right to vote for elected representatives. The ignoring of the petition by the government until the middle of February, and then only to suggest to the Commission to look into the Metis' land claims, is what primarily led the Metis into establishing a provisional government and armed force centered in the small town of Batoche in Saskatchewan. This is when the Northwest Rebellion began. Escalating from the non-priority list appeared déjà vu for Prime Minister Macdonald, because the Metis had had their first rebellion 15 years earlier on the Red River in present-day Winnipeg. The Northwest Mounted Police clashed with the Metis at Duck Lake, and Cree warriors rode to Frog Lake, where they looted settlements after being denied food. Following heavy losses for English Canadians, Prime Minister Macdonald tried to appease some native bands with increased food rations. This worked when the Blackfoot leader pledged to avoid the conflict, meaning a full-scale Indian uprising was prevented. He also quickly mobilized a militia using the new railway. Although the rebellion put up a fierce resistance under their military leader Gabriel Dumont, the outnumbered and overwhelmed Metis fell at Batoche, with Riel surrendering on May 15. So, from these events we can see that the Canadian government deliberately prevented the Metis from having any say to any rights. The government clearly wanted to alienate, to eradicate, to assimilate, and to exterminate the Metis, considering 8 warriors and 1 prominent leader were hanged among the many sentences that were given to the Metis rebels. My third point is that the Metis leader Louis Riel, the acclaimed father of Manitoba, was unnecessarily given the death penalty. Riel was charged with high treason for leading the Northwest Rebellion, and he used the trial to try to vindicate himself. The high treason charge was probably put on Riel because he appointed a military tribunal to try Thomas Scott for treason, which led to the conviction, death sentence, and execution of Scott. He was captured for being part of an Ontario settlers group that planned to attack Fort Garry, the administrative center of Rupert's Land that the Metis had seized, which is in present-day Winnipeg. He was tried for treason because he continually insulted the guards and threatened to shoot Riel if he were ever freed. Protestants in Ontario reacted with anger, with calls for Riel to be hanged, and the Ontario government's offer of a bounty for his capture. Back at Riel's trial, when the government discovered that a Manitoba jury could be half Metis, the trial was moved from Winnipeg to Regina. Only 1 man out of 6 on the jury in Regina spoke French. Prime Minister John A. Macdonald decided to charge Riel with high treason, based on a vague British law from the year 1342. This law carried the death penalty, whereas Canada's treason law did not. Riel addressed the court, listing the undemocratic treatment of the Metis on the prairies, and outlining his vision for a diverse society. It took the jury less than 4 hours to reach a guilty verdict after the 4-day trial. They asked the judge to show mercy and forego the death penalty, but the judge ignored their pleas and sentenced Riel to death on August 3, 1885. Riel was hanged on November 16, 1885 in Regina, despite several appeals and continuing questions about his sanity. This trial did not acknowledge all the contributions Riel had made to fighting for justice and the rights of the trodden-upon Metis. One major accomplishment Riel had made was significantly contributing to the creation of Manitoba. Riel helped to drive away surveyors on land the surveyors claimed before Canada's purchase of Rupert's Land was final, to take Fort Garry with the intention of getting the government's attention, and to compile a list of rights. His efforts resulted with a delegation being sent to Ottawa to negotiate full provincial status, responsible government for the citizens, provisions for separate schools for Catholics, and a grant of 1.4 million acres of land to the children of the Metis. They demanded everything be put on the table with determination, and it succeeded with the creation of Manitoba in May 1870. Riel's death was a huge blow to the Metis, against the Metis, and in spite of the Metis. In conclusion, the moral high ground was taken by the Metis and Louis Riel. The facts that the Metis' land rights are being taken away, the Canadian government fought for the Metis' provisional government with no intent to negotiate, and Louis Riel was unjustly hung, shows why we should remember the Metis Uprising under Louis Riel for the message it tried to send to the government of respecting the Metis. Riel was definitely murdered by Canada. There's not a question about it, said Manitoba Metis Federation President David Chartrand. He was innocent. He was fighting for the Metis people. I think there would be no doubt today.